Hello, this is Arthur Julius Pendragon, and welcome to my tutorial on building a deck for Tabletop Simulator for Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, whenever I'm playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In Tabletop Simulator, people often come into the server, and maybe they've not played Yu-Gi-Oh! In some time, or maybe they're new to Tabletop Simulator or haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh! On Tabletop Simulator before. They tend to ask me one of two questions. The first question they usually ask me is, what the hell are pendulums, and why on earth did Konami add them to Yu-Gi-Oh? Now that's a question for another time. The second question they usually ask me is, how do I create a custom deck for Tabletop Simulator? And how exactly do I get my images, my cards, to such a high quality? As you can see, this is an example of a card I've made for Tabletop Simulator, and the text is really clear, the image is beautiful, and all the information is accurate. Well, I will be showing you that today. So before you start making your deck, you're going to need a few things. To start with, you need a way of making your deck, making your cards. I used to use something called not the card market, YuGoCardMaker.net. A lot of people just, when they're making decks for Tabletop Simulator, they'll just type in whatever card they want. They'll try and get one from DeviantArt, but quite often you can't find one. Oh crikey, that's disgusting. They'll find an image the best they possibly can, and they'll download it and use that image. But they're usually scans, and they're usually a little bit unclear. I myself, they also tend to contain inconsistencies. The cards won't look the same. You know, they'll have little differences in the sticker or the placement of the first edition or something like that. Or quite often, when you're getting cards from places like DeviantArt, sometimes the effect text is actually inaccurate. They might have made a mistake, or something like that, or sometimes they just miss out things, like as you can see with this card, there's no set card list, and for me, I like to be as authentic as possible, so you know, I'm quite a stickler for accuracy in cards, although I do make mistakes sometimes, but I try to create them, and that's why I use TCG Editor. This was good for a time, but unfortunately there's no option for pendulums. The quality is not quite as good as TCG Editor, and if you make a mistake, it can be a bit of a pain to go and correct it. So I don't use this anymore, although it's not a bad tool. But the best thing for me is TCG Editor, which you can find quite easily on their website. So once you've got that, make a folder for all your portraits and for your finished cards, and open it up. So when you open up TCG Editor, you'll start off with a blank card. As you can see, we're going to be making a DDD deck today. I will admit right now that I don't know the deck that well. I'm not very experienced with it, so the deck list I have right here is probably not the best deck list, the best recipe, but it's just something I threw together, and the reason why I'm choosing DDDs is because they have quite a variety of different types of cards. As you can see, they use pendulums, effect monsters, tuners, spells, traps, and of course fusion, synchro, XCs. So it's quite a good little deck to use for a tutorial. So we start off with a normal monster. We need to change that to an effect monster. On the left panel here we have all the information we need to put in. So first of all, dark attribute, that's good. Then the name. You can just copy and paste from the wiki page, and in order to save time, that's what I'm going to be doing for a lot of this stuff, so let's grab the effect. This not only ensures that we save a lot of time in making the deck, it also means that it's going to be accurate. We're not going to be making mistakes with the effects. As you can see, you can just click this plus button to add in the subtype, so it's a fiend effect, and let's just say this was a tuner. It's not a tuner, but if it was, you can add that in, and you can use these arrows to rearrange the placement of those things. You can edit them and you can delete them. So let's put in the attack and defense, and as you can see, all the information is being updated in real time, which is quite nice. Make it a first edition, add in the card set, just copy and paste that as well, card number, and then very conveniently TCG Editor allows us to just click this text click box, and there we go, copyright text. So next we should probably give it a level, and we need a portrait. So search for the card you want to use in the images. Quite a lot of them you can very conveniently find the entire portrait on its own, already cropped for you. For example, on DeviantArt, I've actually already got one of these, so I will simply go to where I've stored that image and use that. Sometimes you will need to crop the image yourself, but just find the clearest, best quality one you can and crop it and add it in like this. And that's all ready to go. Now, because we're making a whole deck, we're going to be adding to batch. So every time you make a new monster, you just click add to batch and it will add it straight in for you. Nice and simple. Now let's move on to the next monster. Give us a little bit of variety. Let's go for a pendulum. So we'll do Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok. There he is. He's got a longer name, so we'll just grab that. Oops. Now, I know from experience that characters like slashes and colons can cause a bit of problems when rendering an entire batch, because it just takes the name that you've got in here and uses that as the file name, and Windows doesn't like file names with special characters. So for cards that have these characters in, we're going to have to actually render them individually. We won't be able to render the entire batch, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So conveniently, to make a monster a pendulum on TCG, this is one of the reasons I like this tool so much, you just check this box and there we go, pendulum. You will notice, however, that it does stretch the image across the pendulum effect. I think this is a legacy thing. I think the first pendulum monsters might have done this in reality, but nowadays, as you can see, they don't stretch. So we're just going to have to edit that in Paint. It's the quickest way of doing it. So again, you can find a good image. Sometimes it's not possible, but there's a nice portrait there. The one I made earlier, I loaded up Paint and just created a bit of blank space there, which means that when it loads in, as you can see, it's nice and lined up and doesn't stretch. So let's grab the effect. As you can see with pendulums, they obviously have two effects, most of them anyway. The monster effect goes in description, and the pendulum effect goes in the effect box. Don't get them the wrong way around, I've done this. And obviously pendulums have a scale. This is a scale 5, so we can bump that up to scale 5. And let's change the attack and defense. Grab the card number. And that looks good to go. Add it to the batch and move on to the next one. So if you make a mistake, this is one of the advantages of having a batch. You can just double click on the card, make any changes you want to make, and then click apply changes, and it'll save it. So I'm going to show you a spell card next. To make a monster into a spell, just click on spell on the drop down. as you can see, spell cards default to spell attribute, and the name turns white. Something I haven't pointed out yet, you can actually change the text of the name in case you're using in case the card you have is printed in ultra rare or secret or anything like that. So let's use doc contract with the gate. Spells are a lot simpler. There aren't so many different things you need to change. Take the docs one. But obviously a lot of spells and traps have different icons, so this is a continuous, but we do have things like equips or counter or quick play. But this is a continuous spell, so we'll just take the continuous icon. So I've already got this image, but again, in this instance, there aren't any portraits for us, so what I've had to do in this case is just download the image and open it up in Paint and crop out the portrait and then just save it. Some images, if they're PNGs, they're a bit too large, they exceed the size, so you need to change them to JPEGs, but yeah, just if in doubt, save as a JPEG. Let's change the name. And if everything looks right, just add to batch. And the same is basically the same case with traps. I don't need to show you making the entire trap really. But let's move on to different types of monsters. So obviously you have rituals. There are no ritual pendulums yet. But there are no rituals in this set, so we won't be making one of those. Let's start with a fusion, because there are lots of fusions in this set. So as you can see, it still has the trap attribute, so let's change that to dark. And we're going to make Flame King Genghis. So as you can see, fusions have materials on them, so we need to make sure that's in the effect text, which it is there. And I've just realised I've made a mistake, so I'm going to have to go back in a sec, but that's okay. That's why we create a batch. Let's just finish making this one first. Oops, change the name. Now, this is a fusion, so we need to add a subtype, and we can rearrange that so it's in the correct format. This only comes in collected tin, so take that set number and grab the number. Oh, and before I make a mistake, it's a fire type, not a dark type, so you have to be careful sometimes. Fire type. Sorry, attribute. And don't forget to change the attack and defense. And of course the portrait. Add him to the batch. Oh, as you can see, I have made a mistake with this one as well. Haven't changed the level, but it's easy to change, so just make your change, click apply. And then let's go back to him, because I didn't add pendulum to his subtypes. And save that. Okay, let's move on to a Synchro monster. Synchros and XEs are more or less the same as fusions in terms of the way you build them. See, I've used a secret image for this because it's quite nice. I'll just move straight on to XCs because there's no point wasting time. So, XCs are slightly different. The only real difference is it has a rank rather than a level. Whoops. the wrong page. There we go. But the principle's still essentially the same. As you can see, after you've made a few cards, you can get quite fast at editing them. Change the portrait and then we should be ready. And as you can see, materials appear again because it does require 2 materials, and the effect is alright. Everything looks good. Add to the batch. And you just continue doing that until you've built a deck. Once you've finished making all the cards you need, you move on to the next step. Okay, so as you can see, I've finished making all the cards in the set. Now, the next thing to do is to render the cards. Now, as I said before, because this has a special character in the name, it's not going to render them all as a set. In fact, when I click on render the batch, what it's giving me is everything but the DDs and the DDDs. So let's go and render each of these individually. To render the batch, you click on obviously render batch and you choose the settings, and then it attempts to do it, but it's not going to work in this case. If I go into the batches, as you can see, it's no different. So we'll just have to double click on each of the cards, go to card design and render that individual card. This normally isn't a problem, it's just because of the special character, and then we'll just give them a name. And then if we have a look in the batches, that should, there we go, nothing wrong with that by the look of it. And as you can see, it's a high quality card, so I'll just finish off rendering all those cards and then we can look at how to upload them into TTS. Okay, so after we've got all the cards rendered, not that one, that's the one. We just need to fill in the TTS deck editor. Now, this is a really nice tool as well. You can find that online, I believe. The first thing we need to do, well, we'll just start add one card, and then we can go to change card size. We want them to be 700 by 1000 because that's the correct dimensions for a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Now, when I'm placing it in the deck editor, I always put out the full deck list just so that I'm clear that I've got the right number of cards and I'm not missing anything. So I'll put them in the way that I'm gonna be running it. So 3 of those, 2 of those, 2 Thomas and 3 Kepler. Where are you, Kepler? There it is, staring me right in the face. 1 Baphomet, 1 Night Howling, or Night Howl. 3 of those Swirl Slime. 3 Necro Slime. 3 Lamia. One of those, 3 Kates, 1 Witch, 3 Allure. Keep the traps separate. Now there are some other spells and traps that I'm going to use, but I've rendered them previously. I'm actually going to rearrange all my folders so the cards that I share between various decks I can find in one place. I need Trish. Okay, so we just need Regeki and 3 trade-in, and I believe I'm going to have to go back to the dark old days. I wonder if we got it in here. We'll need one of those. Oh, not that version. I think I've actually got a better Regeki, so I'm going to use the better one, but that is good for my trade-in. And that's that done. So now all that's left to do is save the deck as... Save it, choose the name and place it in a new folder. Somewhere that's going to be easy to get to in Tabletop Simulator. And finally, export it. You want it at this size. Give it 7,000 times 7,000. And save it there. So then if you open up the folder where that's being kept, DDD, as you can see, this is what the image looks like. And that's what Tabletop Simulator is going to cut out for us when we load it up. Okay, so now that we have Tabletop Simulator loaded up, we're going to single player. And just close that page down. Open up the chest and custom. And then we want to choose custom deck. Browse local files. I've obviously got recent, but you'll have to navigate manually. So ddd.png. You want to upload it to the cloud. I wouldn't use any other image hosting site because a lot of people tend to get 404 errors. Other people when you're trying to load it into their game. So it's always best to use the Steam Cloud. And then also you want a card back. So I just got a standard TCG card back for Yu-Gi-Oh! Some people like to use custom card backs. I prefer to use the standard one. But that's just me. I can't remember exactly how many cards there are in this set. I'll just play it safe at 50. So import. And there we go. It's loaded in. Just make a couple of copies just in case something happens. And then obviously the top load will be black because I couldn't remember how many different images I had. Now at 36, okay. So we get rid of those 14. Now, this is again me being meticulous, but I like to name all my cards. Just a little nice thing to add, and just a note, when they're face down you can't see the name, which is obviously very useful. Oh, and that's what the back looks like, just in case you're interested. And as you can see, it's high quality, you can read it, it's beautiful. So I'll just continue naming all these and then place them in a pile like this. And when I've built up the pile a little bit, I'll then name the pile. So you want this to call this the extra deck, and just put my name. So when I hover over it, it says DDD extra deck, and then brings up my authorship. I'll just continue to fill these in. So once you've finished doing all that, we can just name this. And then finally, I'll just bring in a deck box for it. Since this is DDD, let's give it a nice DDD colour tint. I think that makes sense. Then in it goes, and save to chest. Might not. Oh yeah, that's fine. Let's just make sure it's in there. Okay, it's not in there. It doesn't like the forward slashes, so let's give it a different name. Okay, then we can just load up a Yu-Gi-Oh board. And bring it in. Oops. And something to play against. Oh no, not my extra deck. Just resize those to fit the board. And there we are. Here are the cards, all ready to go. And then if we switch to blue, as you can see, card in the hand just appears to him to be a lovely painting of the Ragnarok. So that's basically the end of the tutorial. I hope you found it useful. I'm sure many of you won't be so bothered in going to the full extent of building this deck to the fullest as I've done, straight from scratch. But I had a lot of problems with some of the other decks that you find. Not to point it out, but I'll just take a look and see if I can get an example with one of these ones that's on the map as stock. Actually, that's not bad. I don't know if they've been updated. I remember Batterymen in here was particularly low resolution. Let's see if it might have actually been updated, but yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So my experience of that sort of thing was what led me to want to make my cards from scratch. And but whether you go through the full extent of all of those steps I've gone through, it should give you a good indication, a good idea of exactly how I get my cards to the top quality and how you can upload your own custom deck to Yu-Gi-Oh. So I hope you have fun making Yu-Gi-Oh decks and playing Yu-Gi-Oh and Tabletop Simulator. Hopefully I'll see you on Tabletop Simulator sometime. Thanks guys.